Know what to eat, but find yourself not eating it. Perhaps you've been on diets and off again and just wonder why you can't stick to them. The Eating For You podcast, hosted by me, Sally Ann Pisk, will show you what's been missing so you can enjoy a healthier way of eating that lasts. Hi, Sally Ann here. Have you ever come back from travelling, a holiday, and felt bloated, a bit sluggish, maybe even frustrated or guilty that your healthy eating habits just went out the window? And if you're saying, yes, Sally Ann, that's me, you're not alone. And this episode has been prompted by me actually planning an overseas trip at the moment, but also my coaching calls with ladies. They can be really frustrated and disappointed in themselves that they seem to get momentum with healthy eating, but as soon as a holiday comes up, they travel, whether it's interstate for a weekend or a longer overseas trip, that momentum is stalled, maybe forgotten altogether. But the other thing is, it's not long to the summer holidays here in Australia, so it's quite timely for us all to start thinking, what does healthy, mindful eating mean for me while I'm travelling? So in this episode, I'm going to be recapping on some of the core principles of mindful eating. So I think that's really important. Even if you've been practicing mindful eating for a while, it's often good to revisit it in a different context like travel. The other thing I'm going to be doing, which is most important, is sharing the practical strategies that help me feel nourished from food while I'm travelling. As a dietitian for over 30 years and specialising in mindful eating and changing eating habits, I've had my own mishaps with food along the way as well while travelling. I've also had some really pleasant, positive, memorable occasions with food as well. But what I find as a vegetarian eater, especially in countries that don't cater for vegetarians, including the country that I live in, there's this misconception that vegetarian eaters don't like food or they don't eat very much. And of course, neither of those are true. And explains why I love travelling in Thailand, Nepal and India, because vegetarian food is part of the mainstream menu in those countries. So when we consider mindful healthy eating, we might need to take a bit of a mindset shift, because we have to be careful of what our definition of healthy is. Yes, and that's true. Healthy for you, for me, and for someone else can be quite different. And we're bombarded, aren't we? In fact, we're overwhelmed by that food noise in mainstream media, social media, everywhere, helpful family, friends. What does healthy actually mean? So I just want to spend a little time now explaining the difference between mindful eating and healthy eating. Mindful eating is a tool, a strategy, a practice to help us find what foods and what amounts of foods actually nourish us. So it's not about counting calories, counting carbs, or counting anything for that matter. The Eating For You approach, which is based on mindful eating, is all about helping you find out what healthy means to you, what foods, what eating patterns actually make you feel well, vitalized and happy without all that restriction and guilt that you may have experienced before about food. And a core part of mindful eating is not only tuning into your level of hunger and satiety, but actually learning to trust those signals as well. But a part of the mindful eating practice that is well known is being able to focus in or observe the experience of eating, the aromas, the colours, the textures of our food, and they just add to that pleasurable experience of eating food. And as my clients often tell me, they know when they're eating mindfully because they can taste their food. For me, there's a couple of things that happen when I don't eat mindfully. And one that you might be familiar with as well is that I'm eating away and I go to take that last mouthful of food and I realize that I've already finished my plate. If I'm really distracted while I'm eating, then I can get some really unpleasant side effects. I am a person who has irritable bowel syndrome, and I like to say it is in remission. But if I don't focus on eating, if I don't allow myself to be present for that eating experience, I'm going to end up with bloating and just feeling very uncomfortable and sluggish in my body after a meal. So for me, it's not just about the choice of foods, it is also about how I eat, and just allowing my mind and body to focus on eating is a sure way to ease those irritable bowel syndromes. And a couple of foods that I have to watch out for and let restaurants and cafes know about is capsicum and mushrooms. So you may have foods that you need to let food outlets, and if you're staying in, self-catered accommodation, that's fine. But if food's being prepared for you, it's really important that you let your hosts know what foods you can and can't eat. So mindful eating is really helping us to observe our food and what really works for us and fine-tune what doesn't work. It's not about, oh no, I made a mistake, this is terrible, I'm a failure. It's more about stepping into that curiosity and saying, well, that didn't quite work for me. Was it the food? Was it the amount that I ate? Or was I actually distracted when I was eating? So the beauty of mindful eating is that it goes with you no matter where you are. And that is so important when we're traveling, because we're thrown into a new environment, not just a new food environment. So a question that I'm often asked is, how does mindful eating actually help you to eat healthier when there's no food rules to follow? I'll explain a few examples that my clients share with me. A common one is, I don't eat the whole block of chocolate anymore because I don't feel well afterwards. So that pleasure of eating chocolate is actually ruined by overeating. Another important one is, I really make an effort to eat my 5 vegetables a day because it makes a huge difference to easing my constipation. And of course, when your digestive system is working well, then you feel well. So when perhaps just through busyness or not planning, if we don't eat enough vegetables, then you can experience these negative side effects. So eating vegetables becomes a really pleasurable and important thing to do because you notice the change in your body. And another really important one is, when we eat mindfully, my clients will say to me, I can actually pick the emotional eating triggers now. So if I feel those emotions coming, I can actually apply a strategy that doesn't mean reaching for food to soothe. And when we're traveling, as much as it can be exciting, it can be relaxing, it can be an adventure, there is always stress, because it is very rare, in my experience anyway, that your holiday goes 100% to plan. There can be flight delays, there can be unexpected illness, there can be all sorts of things that happen along the way. So if we have a habit of stress or emotional eating, then that can be triggered on our holidays as well. So a mindful eating approach is going to be much more beneficial to help you stick to healthier eating on your travels, rather than trying to stick to a diet plan or even a healthy meal plan, because the unexpected always happens. There's going to be changes in schedules, changes in meal times, and also different social situations to navigate as well. And healthy eating at any time, but especially when we're traveling, is not about restricting food. It's about enjoying foods that nourish us and make us feel well and happy. Before I get into some of the practical tips for traveling, I do want to share some of my core practices that underpin my mindful eating while traveling. And I will be sharing some stories where I haven't stuck to these, and there's been some unpleasant side effects, you could say. So one of the most important things is to get some grounding practices with your food. Some people might call these anchoring practices. But for me, having a nourishing breakfast is really important. But of course, to actually enjoy our breakfast, we have to wake up with physical hunger. And I'm going to be talking about that next. So at home for me, my breakfast might be oats and fruit and nuts and seeds and yogurt. But when I'm in Nepal, for example, I will often have dal, vegetables, and rice for breakfast. So something quite different, but it actually works for me. So having that breakfast doesn't mean you have to eat exactly what you eat at home, but finding something that nourishes you in the food environment and culture where you are. Taking a pause before eating is really important at any time, but especially when we're traveling. Traveling, as I said, can be all sorts of things. At times it can be relaxing, but at other times it can be stressful. So just taking that pause means we can remove the distractions of our traveling experience and actually focus on eating and eat mindfully. Because if we're distracted while eating, you might be like me and end up with some unpleasant gastro effects, or you just might not eat enough, or you might find yourself overeating. The other thing that I really pay attention to when I'm traveling is staying hydrated. And of course, depending on where you're traveling, you have to take extra caution to make sure that the water that's available to you is drinkable. So often now there's filtered water, and if not, we may have to resort to bottled water. But taking your own drinking flask means that you can minimize the amount of plastic bottles you are actually using. And if you're self-catering, sometimes the water is safe enough that as long as you boil it for 3 minutes and cool it, then that's going to be fine to drink as well. Because if we get dehydrated while traveling, we're going to feel tired. We might feel hungry as well. So we're going to be sort of tipping over into food when actually we need to be just drinking more water. And staying hydrated during flights is really important as well. So I often take water on flights because some airlines don't give you enough water during the flight to stay hydrated. And it can be useful again to have your flask on the plane, because if the flight attendants have those large bottles of water, you can ask them to actually refill your flask, and you might have 750 mils of your own water that you can drink during the trip. The other thing is that these anchoring or grounding mindful eating practices can work anywhere. I remember being in a crowded food market in San Diego, and I had to stand to eat my empanadas, but I ate them mindfully. And one thing that comes to mind when I recall this experience was I can still feel the crispiness of the pastry. So tuning in to hunger and satiety are core practices of mindful eating. And many ladies that I work with really don't understand that concept of satiation. We know what hungry feels like, physical hunger. You know, we might feel empty, we might have stomach rumbles, and we also know what full often feels like, and there might be degrees of fullness as we eat more and more. Satiation really is that point of eating where you no longer feel hungry, but you don't feel physically full. And research from the Blue Zones community shows that eating to what they describe as 80% full is one of the key factors contributing to longevity in those communities where people often live well into their 90s and 100s. So satiation really means I've had enough and I don't feel full. When we travel though, we're surrounded by food, or when food is available, we may not actually be hungry. So just taking that pause to check in whether you're actually physically hungry or not is really important. And if that is the time that you need to eat and you're on a tour perhaps, then what you can do is ask if you can take a takeaway container, if the food's appropriate, of course, and eat it later. Or you can have a small amount so you're not getting overly full. And that's why having travel snacks is really important, because on the flip side, you could actually feel hungry when it's not a formal or set meal time for your travel. So the things that I like to take as travel snacks are nuts and seeds, fruit, yogurt if the climate's okay for that, and cheese and crackers. But just make sure when we're talking about, fresh foods and even nuts, that you buy them in the country where you are, because there can be limits to what foods you can take in to different countries. I even got caught out here in Australia. We bought all these wonderful nuts to take hiking with us in Tasmania, and luckily I checked on the website, and of course we couldn't take nuts into Tassie. We had to leave the ones we had at home and restock once we got to Hobart. When I go on holidays that require a lot of movement, which are quite a few of my holidays, whether it's trekking, skiing or snorkeling, and I remember preparing to go to South America, and we were going to be trekking for nearly probably 4 weeks, I think it was, over 2 different treks. And vegetarian eating is not a custom in South America and in Peru where we were. So I had to plan ahead very much with the trekking company to make sure there would be vegetable protein available. Having said that, I mainly ate eggs, and then when I got back home, I don't think I could eat another egg for about 12 months. But the other thing I did was, because my iron levels tend to be on the low side, is that I took an iron supplement with me. So making these choices and planning for holiday nutrition is really dependent upon how long you're going to be away for, and of course what foods are available for you when you're there. The other thing I want to mention, especially when it comes to our hunger levels, is if you are more active while you're holidaying, you might actually find that you're hungrier than what you are at home. So that is why being really confident in assessing your hunger level is important at any time, but especially in different conditions with eating, especially traveling. Because if you are hungrier and you don't eat enough at a meal, then you're going to be more inclined to snack into the evening, which means you're not going to sleep well and you're not going to wake up and look forward to your breakfast. So if you're not waking up hungry in the morning, it probably indicates that you're eating later into the evening than is ideal, or you're eating more than is ideal at that last meal of the day. So when we're traveling, and especially in different countries, how do we get to enjoy that cultural experience of food without overdoing it? If you are traveling with a group, then sharing meals can be a great way to experience different tastes and textures of the local cuisine. The other thing is there can be some really great buffets available, and one comes to mind for me in Singapore. And I can spend 15 minutes just walking around, finding out what's available in the different sections of this buffet, because it is quite big, and then making a choice about what I'm going to eat. And my sort of approach to buffets is that I always put a little bit less on my plate than I would normally eat at that meal time, of course based on my hunger level, because that means I can go back and have seconds of those things that I really enjoyed eating. And for me, I don't know what your approach to eating out is in general, but when traveling, is I want to enjoy new flavors. I want to enjoy new foods. So I want to make sure I've got room in my stomach to actually enjoy eating these different flavors, these different textures, especially the herbs and spices that you can get in the Asian countries. Another way to make sure we tune in to satiation is to eat slowly. Not only will it help us tune in to our level of hunger or fullness, it allows us to really, really savour the food, and that adds to the pleasure of eating. And it also makes eating a much more relaxing, calming, soothing activity as well, which can be a wonderful break from the busyness of travelling. Whether you're hiking, whether you're just on foot sightseeing, or you're city hopping, and it gives you a pause just to relax and recharge, which is really important because that means you can enjoy the remainder of your holiday feeling totally recharged and replenished. Another thing to watch out for, and again it depends on where you're eating, what country you're in, is to try and balance those richer foods with some lighter ones as well. And richness in food often comes from the level of fat in the meal. And my clients are often challenged when travelling that so much of the food that's available to them is deep fried. And not only is the food deep fried, it comes with fries, roast or, fried potatoes. So it is really something to be aware of. We're not going to get it perfect all of the time, but when possible, perhaps skip the fries and ask for steamed vegetables or a salad. And if you do feel like eating some fries, but you don't want half a plate of them, then a good thing to do is, if you're traveling with a friend or a partner, is one of you order the fries and the other order the salad. And that way you can have a bit of both. Being able to eat foods that are special to the environment or to the location where you are is really important for me as well. And if I'm traveling in warmer weather and I come across a really delicious gelato, then that will become part of my daily eating ritual. And the good thing about going for a gelato is that we often walk. So we're getting some movement, we're getting to sightsee in the local area that we're staying as well. So looking for those little rituals, if you're in a place for a few days, is a really nice way to feel a little bit of a part of that community while you're staying there. And of course, as a dietitian, I really love exploring food markets when I'm in a different country. And I've been to food markets in Cusco, in Cairo and Kathmandu, just to name a few. And you get to see what fresh produce is available and what local people are doing with this food, and they love to talk to you about it. You come across an interesting vegetable and you find out how it's cooked, and that just adds so much enjoyment around food when you're traveling. You're not necessarily eating those foods, but you're getting an experience around food as well. So feeling well while we're traveling is strongly linked to food. I recall being in the final 2 weeks of an 8-week overseas holidays a few years back, and we went to Nepal, India, then across to Austria, Croatia, and into Italy. I absolutely, of course, loved the food in India and Nepal, where beans and lentils are part of the local cuisine and the use of spices is just fantastic. But I really started to struggle when we got to Europe, especially in Croatia, because most of their local cuisine is cooked with capsicum. And of course, that's one of the things that really triggers my irritable bowel. So I had to eat very plainly there. And even in Italy, where the fresh vegetables are just wonderful, in the tourist areas, there's very little access to plant protein. So I remember being in Venice for a few days and all I was eating was pizza and salad. And while I love pizza and salad, it was like I really needed to get some protein. So I learnt from that experience and now travel with some protein bars. So I am getting the protein, but most importantly, the essential nutrients that go with protein. And as I mentioned earlier, because I knew it was going to be a problem in South America, I actually did go on to an iron supplement. By the end of this particular 8-week holiday, I was having the most unpleasant symptoms of perimenopause. And the worst one was the night sweats, because obviously it was, making me tired. I wasn't sleeping well. And I knew it was coming from the excess salt from my food and also the sugar and the sips of the local wines. And in this occasion, just stopping the alcohol was not enough to really ease back those symptoms. But the power of food is amazing, because within 2 weeks, when I got back home, I had none of the perimenopause symptoms. So food can help us ease all of these health concerns we have. And the symptoms of perimenopause, my clients tell me, often go beyond menopause as well. So if we can be mindful with our food as much as possible, we can minimize those symptoms of perimenopause. But also, if you need to manage your blood sugar levels, or you're concerned about cholesterol levels or arthritic pain, then really planning these traveling holidays, especially the longer ones, really makes a big difference, because we can minimize the impact of eating foods that are different to what we usually have at home, and those foods that nourish us. And so this is the time we'll get into those practical tips to help you actually achieve that. Mindful eating doesn't ignore nutrition. It just comes about in a different way. I'll give you an example. When I think about eating out, whether I'm at home in Australia or traveling overseas, it is like, what's my protein and where are my vegetables? What am I actually going to have at this meal? Because carbs, well, they're normally not the problem. There's generally plentiful amount of carbohydrate when we're eating out. Making sure we get adequate protein and spreading it out over the day, plus those vegetables, will really help keep us feel energized, keep the bowels moving, and we avoid those feelings of sluggishness and being bloated. And getting too many carbs when eating out is another one of the frustrations that my clients talk about. One trick that my husband and I find works really well is we order one main meal, knowing it's got enough protein in it for both of us, and then we might order, 1 or 2 sides of salad and vegetables. The amount ends up being about right, and we're getting those important vegetables as well. So really ask about the vegetables, what the serve size is, what the serve size is of a meal, and make it work for you. Because when we eat out, people want us to enjoy that experience, and if they can, they will create the experience that we want. Another thing about staying healthy while traveling is being cautious around food safety and food hygiene. If a food is meant to be cold, make sure it's coming out of a refrigerator. So, pre-cooked meats, for example, that are being eaten cold. Salads really need to be kept in a refrigerator as well. And also make sure you can wash your hands or take, hand gel with you, so you're keeping yourself hygienically clean as well for eating. And just to mention here about water, make sure, as I mentioned earlier, that the water is drinkable. Especially in your accommodation. A girlfriend of mine ended up in bed very unwell for 7 days. She knew she couldn't drink the water in her accommodation, but she accidentally washed her toothbrush with the local water, and that was enough to make her very unwell for about 7 days, because our gut is just not used to the bugs that are in that water supply. You can never ask too many questions about your food. Find out, is there added salt? Is there added sugar? What type of oil has been used for cooking? I was in a very sticky situation in Malaysia on one trip. because they used palm oil for cooking. And I just couldn't do the mouthfeel or the taste of the palm oil. And I was just very fortunate that there was an Indian chef in the kitchen who could cook without palm oil and provide me with really tasty and nourishing foods. So finding out ahead of time is always important, especially if you're on a sort of a holiday that's being catered for you, whether it's a tour, whether it's a hiking trip, whether it's a snorkeling resort, dive resort. Just make sure you know about the food, because if you're going to an isolated spot, it's very hard to make changes afterwards. So find out about the food. Most places will have menus available on the internet. In my case, I have to make sure there's plant protein, let them know about the mushrooms and the capsicum. A friend who was traveling in Indonesia with us last year, he has celiac disease and has to eat gluten-free. So he took his gluten-free snack bars with him, and of course I had my protein bars. So planning ahead really can reduce the disappointment and the mishaps with food. And sometimes when you travel, you may actually choose accommodation that allows you to self-cater. And my husband and I did this on a recent trip to Western Australia, because we knew in this particular place that we were visiting, vegetarian eating was not really catered for, yet the supermarkets were well stocked with plant-based protein. So that can be fun as well, just cooking simply, because that's what we have also found, that a lot of self-catering places require you to cook in 1 or 2 pots or a wok and a pot. So you can have fun just putting all those yummy ingredients that you enjoy into a simple meal. Of course, some of us are more foodies than others. I like to eat well and feel nourished and have tasty food that really supports you in enjoying your holiday, whether it's for an adventure, whether it's for relaxation, for sightseeing or for learning. Whatever the purpose of your holiday is, the way we eat will allow you to enjoy it to your fullest. But the other thing is, when we're on holidays, it's not just the food that we're eating. It's seeing that we can have a good sleep routine, have movement in our day. And often movement can be more than what we do at home because of sightseeing on foot or doing an active holiday, such as a hike or a trek or ski touring, snorkeling, diving. All of those things take extra energy. And I've heard about some amazing cycling holidays, especially in the Alps. You certainly get a workout there and will be much hungrier than what you are at home. So just recapping, mindful eating allows you to eat healthier, but it's not focusing just on the nutrients in food. It's focusing on what makes you feel well, healthy, and happier. Having some daily practices that ground you and anchor you and get you set up for a mindful day ahead are really important. But also feeling that you have the freedom to enjoy the local foods and immerse yourself in the culture is really important. And when it comes to practical tips for traveling, it really is about doing your research and planning ahead, taking those foods that may not be available for you, letting people know ahead of time about your dietary requirements. But most of all, before you go on holidays, get into the practice of mindful eating and really understand how your body and mind feel when you're physically hungry, when you're satisfied, and when you're full. They will be your best friends for traveling, your own body signals to let you know how well nourished you are and what foods are going to be best for you at that particular meal time. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And as I said, travel comes up in different ways for all of us. Some of us travel all the time for work. Some of us may travel very infrequently and then, of course, not be planned for it when it occurs. So mindful eating is your best friend at home and when you're traveling. And if you'd like to learn more about mindful eating or feel like you'd like a recap, make sure you download our free resource, The 5 Steps Towards a New Way of Eating. And the link to that resource is available in this episode's notes. So I've really enjoyed sharing this final episode in Series 5 on the couch with you today. And I look forward to returning in about 3 weeks' time with some really lovely guests to explore summer eating with Tanya Grasewski. We've also got Carolyn joining us to talk about her journey from being on and off diets to finding a sustainable, healthy way of eating through mindful eating. And there'll be lots of tips shared in the other episodes leading up to the festive season. So as always, if you have enjoyed this episode, let us know and share it on your social media pages. And I look forward to returning with Series 6 on November 24th. You have been listening to the Eating For You podcast with Sally Ann Pisk. If a long-term way of healthier eating is of interest to you, then make sure you subscribe to our podcast.